From the bloody guillotine of the French Revolution to the icy steppes of Russia with Napoleon's doomed army, today we're diving headfirst into the chaos that birthed the modern world. We will witness the rise of the common people, the fall of absolute kings, and the terrifying reign of terror where no one was safe. Then we'll track the meteoric rise of a young artillery officer named Bonaparte, who hijacked the revolution to crown himself emperor of half of Europe. Was he a hero of the Enlightenment or a power-hungry tyrant? Yes. And finally, we'll sit at the table with the puppet masters at the Congress of Vienna as they try to desperately turn back the clock and pretend that none of it ever happened. It's kings, it's chaos, and the fight for the soul of Europe. Unit 5 is here for AP Euro, and it's explosive, literally and figuratively. Coming up on today's episode of AP History Help. Welcome back to another episode of AP History Help. I'm Wendy, and I'm unbelievably stoked for today's episode. Why? Because we have finally arrived to Unit 5. If you've been feeling like AP Euro is just a lot of dead kings and theological arguments so far, buckle up. Unit 5, conflict, crisis, and reaction in the late 18th century is where things absolutely explode. We are talking about the French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, and the massive conservative backlash that tried to put the genie back in the bottle, unsuccessfully. I do have a little holiday treat for my fun fact later, for those of you who celebrate or even those who are curious about cultural origins. But in the meantime, if you have enjoyed the podcast, if you have gotten value from it, please let me know. Did you know that in addition to Spotify Wrapped showing you stats about your listening habits, it also gives creators stats about their podcast or their music. And it's only based on my Spotify audience, not based on those of you who listen on Apple Podcasts or any one of the other number of podcast listening platforms. But Spotify, my podcast on Spotify has outpaced 99% of other podcasts in terms of growth. That's you guys. That's my listeners. That has increased my following by 766%. Like, what even is that? Yeah, really. And I think most special that on Spotify alone, I have 209 top fans. That means there's 209 people whose number one podcast was mine. My first reaction to discovering this was, who are they? Be still my beating heart. Thank you. But I have questions. Who are you? Where are you? Please, if you are one of my regular listeners, it would mean so much to me if you would just comment wherever you are listening and where you're listening from. Other cool accolades from Spotify is that AP History Help is a number one rising star for 2025, a 2025 talked about show, and a 2025 most shared show. That's you guys. Thank you. Your girl is blushing here. If you're watching the video on Spotify, which, by the way, we're in the top 15% for video podcasts, you would see me blushing. Maybe. I don't know. I'm looking into the camera. There's filters, So, okay. Anyway, you guys came to listen about history, not about me. So it's time to stop bragging. This unit is a beast. It is arguably the most important turning point in modern European history. If you get a DBQ or an LEQ on the exam, there's a high chance that it will touch on the themes that we're going to talk about today. So grab those notes, maybe a stress ball, and let's dive into the chaos. Come on in, class. It is time for another episode of the AP History Hub podcast. To understand why France completely lost its mind in 1789, we have to look at what we call the Ancien Regime, the old regime. Imagine a society legally divided into three groups or estates. The first estate is the clergy, the second estate is the nobility, and together they own huge amounts of land, hold all the important government jobs, and crucially, pay almost zero taxes. Then there's the third estate. This is everybody else, the peasants, the urban city workers, the merchants, the lawyers, the doctors, the bourgeoisie. They make up about 97% of the population and possess almost no political power, and they carry the entire tax burden of France on their backs. By the late 1780s, this system was breaking down. France was broke. Between funding the American Revolution to spite the British and the extravagant spending of kings like Louis XIV and his wife, Marie Antoinette, at Versailles, the treasury was empty. It was like my bank account after Christmas. Louis XIV, who was not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, tried to implement tax reforms, but the nobility blocked him. So desperate in 1789, he called a meeting of the Estates General, something that had not happened in over 150 years. It went badly immediately. The Third Estate realized that the voting system was rigged against them. So, fed up, they broke away on June 17th, 1789, and declared themselves the National Assembly, swearing the tennis court oath not to.
We won't leave until we are finished.
Not to disband until they had written a constitution. The revolution had begun. Tensions boiled over on July 14th when angry Parisians stormed the Bastille prison looking for gunpowder. This was the moment the masses got involved, and there was no turning back. The first phase of the French Revolution was relatively moderate. The National Assembly abolished feudal privilege and issued the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen. This is a massive document, a really important document for AP Euro. It's basically France incorporating Enlightenment ideals like liberty, equality, and natural rights into law. They also created a constitutional monarchy. Louis XIV was still king, but his power was checked by a legislature. Now, Louis, not a fan of that, but he wasn't exactly given a choice. And the legislature was concerned that if neighboring countries heard the king was deposed, they would take advantage of France's weakness and invade. So this was a moderate but practical solution. But things didn't stay moderate for long. Why did it get radical? A few reasons. First, the economy was still terrible, and people were hungry. Second, in 1792, France went to war with Austria and Prussia, who wanted to crush the revolution before it spread into their own countries. And third, the king got caught trying to escape France to join those foreign enemies. So suddenly the constitutional monarchy seemed like a bad idea, and the king was seen as a traitor. So that paved the way for the radical faction led by the Jacobins to take control in 1792. They abolished the monarchy and declared France a republic. And in 1793, they did the unthinkable. They executed King Louis XIV by way of the guillotine, which, by the way, was used to kill a whole lot of people. In just a moment, we're going to talk about this because it kicked off the most infamous part of the French Revolution, known as the Reign of Terror. Facing foreign invasions and internal rebellions, the government created something called the Committee of Public Safety, eventually led by a man who's got a great name but not such a great reputation in history, Maximilien Robespierre. That's my favorite name. I always used to tell my students in the classroom, like, if you swear to me you'll name your firstborn child Maximilian Robespierre, or at least Maximilian, I'll give you extra credit, but I guess I had no way to prove it. Anyway, it could be a good middle name. So anyway, sorry. I'm off on a tangent. Robespierre believed that to save the Republic of Virtue, terror was necessary. For about a year, paranoia ruled. If you were suspected of being a counter-revolutionary, maybe you didn't call your neighbor citizen enthusiastically enough, you could be sent to the guillotine. Tens of thousands died. They even tried to de-Christianize France, creating a new calendar and getting rid of Sundays to erase religious tradition. Eventually, people got sick of the fear, sick of the control, and in 1794, in what's called the Thermidorian Reaction, Robespierre himself was executed, and the revolution swung back toward the center. They set up a new, weaker government called the Directory. It was corrupt, inefficient, and it relied heavily on the military to stay in power. And speaking of the military, that brings us to the man who would hijack the entire revolution. But first, let's take a quick break for something a little lighter. Since this episode is dropping in mid-December and we are talking about European history, I wanted to share a quick holiday-related fun fact centered in Europe. We all know about Christmas trees, right? Well, the tradition of bringing an evergreen tree inside and decorating it did not begin in the movie Fred Claus. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend. Anyway, it began in 16th century Germany. There's a legend that connects it to a major figure that we studied in Unit 2, Martin Luther. The story goes that Luther was walking home one winter night, composing a sermon in his head, and he looked up and he was struck by the beauty of the stars twinkling amidst the evergreen trees. He wanted to recreate that scene for his family, so he brought a tree into his home and wired lit candles onto the branches to represent the stars. Now, please do not try wiring lit candles to a tree today. It's a massive fire hazard. I don't want to be responsible for that. But it's fascinating that the guy who split the Catholic Church might also be responsible for the centerpiece of modern Christmas decor. Speaking of Christmas, here is a great holiday gift idea. Did you know that I have a book on Amazon called Success Planner for History Students? For my podcast listeners, if you would like a copy, $5 off, which would make it $9.95, message me through my website, aphistoryhelp.com. There's a little pop-up that comes up. You just fill in your name and your email address and say, I want the book. And if you're among the first 25 people to do that before January 1st, that's right, I'm extending it to the whole Christmas season, I'll arrange to send you a copy within the United States. But that's like a 30% discount off the original price. And it's a really great way to help you stay on track and be organized with what you're learning in any AP history class. Okay, back to France. So the Directory is struggling. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte.
Merci.
Napoleon was a brilliant, ambitious artillery officer who made a name for himself winning battles during the Revolutionary Wars. And in 1799, he participated in a coup d'etat that overthrew the Directory and established a new government called the Consulate, with himself as first consul. Basically, the Republic was dead. Napoleon was a military dictator, and 5 years later, in 1804, he famously crowned himself Emperor of the French. Now, for the AP exam, you need to understand Napoleon as a complex figure. Was he a child of the Enlightenment and of the Revolution? Or was he just another absolute tyrant? And the answer to that question is yes. Domestically, meaning at home in France, he was a reformer. His biggest achievement was the Napoleonic Code. This standardized the confusing laws of France into one clear legal system. It guaranteed the equality of all male citizens before the law and protected property rights, a key goal of the early revolution. He also patched things up with the Catholic Church in the Concordat of 1801 and established a meritocracy in the military and the government. However, he also shut down free speech, censored the press, used secret police, and completely stripped women of the few rights that they had gained during the revolution. Internationally, Napoleon was a conqueror. From about 1803 to 1814, the Napoleonic Wars raged across Europe. He defeated Austria, Prussia, and Russia on the battlefields, redrawing the map of Europe and spreading the Napoleonic Code and revolutionary ideas like nationalism wherever his armies went. But he couldn't defeat Britain, whose navy was supreme. He tried to choke Britain economically with the continental system, banning European trade with them. But it ended up hurting the continent more than the British. And the people of the continent were definitely not happy about that. His ultimate downfall started in 1812 when he made the catastrophic decision to invade Russia. The Russians used scorched earth tactics, retreating and burning supplies as they were losing their battles. They're like, well, we're going to lose and we're going to make sure that the French have nothing to take and benefit from. Now, Napoleon took Moscow, but it was empty and on fire. Forced to retreat in the dead of bitter cold Russian winter, his grand army of 600,000 was reduced to a pathetic fraction by cold, starvation, and Russian attacks. Sensing blood in the water, the other European powers formed a coalition and finally defeated him. Napoleon was exiled to Elba, came back for 100 days, and was defeated for good at Waterloo in 1815. He was then exiled, quite sadly, to the island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean, where he would die in 1821 from stomach cancer at the age of 51. Kind of young for such a active and accomplished life. So Napoleon is gone. Europe is teaching. Do you know? I know teachers who teach the AP course. They know, but kids, do you know teachers like celebrate the killing of Napoleon? We always try to kill Napoleon by Christmas, and lo and behold, this episode comes out before Christmas. I've done it. So yay! Napoleon's gone. Europe is wrecked after 25 years of constant warfare. What now? The major powers, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, met at the Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 1815 to pick up the pieces. The leading figure here was the Austrian foreign minister, Klemens von Metternich. Von Metternich is the ultimate symbol of 19th century conservatism. He hated liberalism, hated nationalism, and blamed them for the chaos of the last 2 decades. The goal of the Congress of Vienna was to turn back the clock. They wanted to restore the legitimate monarchs that Napoleon had kicked out. They wanted to create a balance of power so no single country like France could ever dominate Europe again. They created what's known as the Concert of Europe, an agreement where the great powers would meet periodically to solve problems and crush new revolutionary movements that popped up. And for a while, it worked. They managed to prevent a massive European-wide war for nearly a century. But they couldn't erase the ideas of the French Revolution. Let me repeat that. But they couldn't erase the ideas of the French Revolution. The seeds of liberalism and nationalism had been planted, and they would grow throughout the 19th century, leading to revolutions. In 1848, a series of political upheavals swept across Europe. These revolutions were sparked by a mix of factors, including economic hardship, discontent with existing political systems, and the growing influence of liberal and nationalist ideas. In France, in what we call the February Revolution, they overthrew King Louis Philippe and the established Second Republic. This event served as a catalyst for revolutions in other parts of Europe. In the German states, still not Germany yet, protests and uprisings occurred in various German states, with demands for constitutional reforms, national unification, and greater political representation. The Frankfurt Parliament was established to draft a constitution for a unified Germany, but its efforts ultimately failed. The Austrian Empire faced a wave of revolutions in Vienna, Budapest, and other cities. These uprisings were driven by demands for constitutional government, national autonomy, and the abolition of serfdom. The revolution in Hungary was particularly significant, with Lajos Kossuth leading the push for independence. And revolts broke out in several Italian states, including Sicily, Naples, and Rome. And these uprisings were motivated by desires for unification, constitutional reforms, and independence from foreign rule. While many of the revolutions of 1848 achieved some initial success, they were ultimately suppressed by those conservative forces. However, these events had a lasting impact on European history. They highlighted the growing power of liberal and nationalist ideologies, paving the way for future political transformations. Well, that's a wrap on Unit 5. It is a whirlwind of a unit, from absolute kings to guillotines to emperors and back to kings again. Make sure you understand the different phases of the revolution and the complex legacy of Napoleon. And don't be surprised if Metternich shows up on your exam. Getting value from the podcast? Want to support the show? Share it with a friend, a classmate, a teacher, or even a lover of history. I'm on all the major platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as most of the socials: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, where I post shorts, and Substack. Follow me on any and all of them and comment on a post. I'll answer back, I promise, even if it's just to say thank you for your support. Looking ahead at our schedule, we're taking a teeny tiny little short break for the holidays, but we will be back in 3 weeks, just after the new year, on January 5th. We are doing a special thematic deep dive on the role of women throughout European history. Then on January 19th, we will jump back into AP Euro with Unit 6, Industrialization and its Effects. Thank you so much for listening to AP History Help. Good luck with your midterms, which I know many of you are taking this week. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Keep reading or listening, and see you next year.